Welcome to the Voice of Retail special CommerceNext Bonus episode, part 2. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, and this podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. On this episode, I talk with Joe Megibow, CEO of innovative mattress brand and manufacturer Purple. With decades of senior-level .com experience with the likes of Expedia and American Eagle behind him, Joe is helping Purple break through the huge bedding category. Next, veteran retail and consumer analyst Ken Cassar, principal of CassarCo, strategy and analytics consultant, joins me and gives us an overview, a top-line analysis of recent U.S. online retail and consumer data and helps us understand shopping trends during the COVID era. First, let's hear from Joe from Purple. Joe, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Michael. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me. Take a bit of time to chit and chat in advance of CommerceNext coming up at the end of July. Why don't we jump right in? Tell us a bit about yourself, the background, your personal background, and current role, and all about Purple.
No, I appreciate that. As a young child, I had one goal in life, and it was to someday sell mattresses. And I can say I have achieved that goal now.
Take the rest of the day off, Joe. Take the rest of the day off.
Exactly. Aim low. Although there's, for the humor, it is part of the opportunity. And that's, as most consumers think about buying a mattress, it doesn't rank up high in pleasurable shopping experiences. And, there are history of mattress stores ranking up there, just slightly above, fortunately above, but slightly above used car salesmanships. So it isn't a category that genuinely people think of as exciting retail, but it's it is a very important part of all our lives. So backing up a little. So I'm the CEO of Purple Innovation. I joined the company just closing in on 2 years ago now, although Purple itself has actually been around in some form or another for nearly 30 years now. Started really with a lot of technology and invention on gels and a variety of cushioning applications, starting with actually wheelchair pads and some medical bed applications. But before I get into Purple, I've been in e-commerce since before the name e-commerce was used. Started actually on the technology side of the house in the very early 90s, and have through a series of internet disruptors and even consulting and software companies, have ridden this internet wave since the day that Netscape launched. So passion of mine, and something that don't know what I would have done if it weren't for that. So most recently, some of the bigger jobs, American Eagle Outfitters was a chief digital officer. Before that, I ran the U.S. business for Expedia, so ran Expedia.com, two of the larger companies I've worked with.
Big platform.
And even American Eagle, just given their customer base, which is obviously younger than a lot of retail, we really pushed hard, and we're very early adopters in a lot of what's become best practices in omnichannel retail. Really integrating the customer cross-channel. But I joined Purple a couple years ago, and this was a little bit of a different play. Purple, there were a number of bed-in-a-box type companies, but what was interesting with most of them is at their core, they were really value and convenience plays, which is a lot of where internet disruption happens. It was, how can we find a way to do something that on the surface seemed preposterous, ship a mattress through the mail so that you don't have to go into a store, and eliminate the need to go into the store at all. And oh, by the way, if you cut out the middleman, then you likely have some savings, and we can get you a mattress at a lower price. And that's really what a lot of the bed-in-the-box promise was. We were a little different. We're actually a manufacturer built on real technology, and our biggest source of disruption isn't really about the internet at all. It's about the bed. So while I'd say everyone else was looking for a better way to buy a bed, our entire mission was to create a better bed. It's interesting that there's been very little advancement in this category for decades. Memory foam, which became a significant change in thinking about what a mattress could feel like and how it could perform, was launched over 30 years ago. Adjustable air mattresses, where you can inflate or deflate an air bladder inside the mattress.
Again, sleep number kind of innovation, those kind of customizable controls. Yeah.
Over 30 years ago. So there hasn't been any mainstream advancement. What has happened is just costs have come down, and it's a very value-driven category. But we have technology that is very different. It's not memory foam. It's not traditional materials, where we're able to accomplish some of the things you really want in a bed, which is really even weight distribution and support across your pressure points, but do it in a way that has very high airflow and energy dissipation, which means you just don't get hot as you're sleeping in the middle of the night. And it's things memory foam can't do. So all the benefits without any of the downsides. And to do that, we are a manufacturer. We have now over 1,100 employees. We are domestic. We're actually just signing our third manufacturing facility right now. So we'll have well over 1 million square feet of warehousing and manufacturing space. And we make this, we have over 100 patents issued. We make something fundamentally different. We make it ourselves, and it is a very disruptive product. The internet allowed us to scale much, much faster than we would have 30 years ago, and has allowed us to get access and reach to the customer and help educate. But at our core, it's really all about the product.
It's been I think it's actually a really interesting category, because it's been in some ways a fair bit of disruption, in some ways just a lot of noise, but there's no question a lot more people paying attention to the category, the ownership of sleep from the, as you say, from the box mattresses. And I actually had the opportunity to interview the founder of 8 Sleep, which is introducing technology to sleep, kind of a different approach. So I actually find it a pretty interesting category. And as you said, from the beginning, it's something everyone's buying, and it was kind of a sleepy, excuse the pun, kind of category for many years. Huge, but it was really interesting. Now I was watching some of your videos. They reminded me of kind of a Dollar Shave Club. They're a pile of fun on the site, and you're making those products in Utah, or you mentioned you had a couple of places you were manufacturing them, right?
Yeah, right now our manufacturing facilities are in Utah, where we announced that we're opening another very large facility in the southeast, inked and close to closing. So we haven't announced exactly where yet, but it's imminent, and and that's just domestic. We're still, we did. $428 million in net revenue last year. This year, we had given guidance earlier in the year, pre-COVID, which was around $600 million. We pulled back that guidance as we're a public company. We'd pulled back that guidance as everyone did with COVID, but we have been giving monthly results, which have been fairly extraordinary for us. So, we're a pretty significant player, growing pretty quickly. But what's amazing is it's just mattresses alone domestically is a $16 billion category.
Yeah, it's a mammoth category. It's a mammoth category.
We're, despite all this success we're having, we're still really, less than 4% of the category. So we're an early player. It's interesting. We're moving from the entrepreneurial phase of trying to create a real company to now the scale phase of how do we actually become a significant player with significant share, which is just an interesting shift in really how you do everything in a company. But we're still relatively small.
Let me pick up on the segue. You talked about the beginning of the years as the COVID crisis began, pulled back some guidance. And so my next question, the one I'm asking everyone, is based on what you've learned, what you've experienced, how you are thinking ahead in what is the COVID era. It's not months, it's probably years by the time in one way, shape, or form this all winds up. What's your advice, and how are you thinking to the retailers? 2 stops and 1 start. 2 starts and 1 stop. In other words, start doing these 2 things and stop doing this. And again, based on, the past, 14, 18 weeks and what you anticipate retail will be like in the next, 18, 24 months.
Yeah, my crystal ball's no better than anyone else's. It seems like every time we think we've got this figured out, something else changes. We've got our own brick and mortar showrooms in California, which, as of last night, one of them was shut down. The whole mall was closed. So here we go again. Yeah, I'd say a few things. One, I think when there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change and consumer confusion, partner confusion, employee confusion, I think the first thing you got to start doing is at whatever level you're communicating, you got to ramp it up. There's never a time that it's more important to over communicate. And that's like up and down the line. I mean, what and how you're saying to your customers. A lot of, if you do have a business that has demand right now, you're likely being pressured. I mean, everyone's planning went out the window, whether it's buys or manufacturing or inventory or demand planning. It all changed. I think being very, very transparent with your customers on managing expectations and what's going on as a company and your employees and your channel partners and up and down the line. I think you can't communicate enough right now, which, by the way, creates opportunity to foster loyalty and brand connection and authenticity. Right. There's a lot of good that comes from it, even if what you have to say may not be what people want to hear. But I think building some credibility that you say what you do what you say, and everyone knows what's going on. It's really critical right now. So that would be my first start. My second is online businesses have done very well in general because of COVID. As consumers have been unable or unwilling to get to brick and mortar stores during this time period, there's been a lot of discussion about this, but there's a lot of unlock and discretionary spend. If you're not taking your vacations, you're not traveling, you're not doing expensive out-of-the-home entertainment and sporting events and shows and other things, and even dining out. You may be doing more takeout, but you're not dining out the way you were. So there's actually more discretionary spend. And for home-related categories, I mean, there's significant increase in focus on home. So there's been this big, almost seismic shift online in general and very much in certain categories, which the temptation would be just do more of the same. I actually, my other start is I don't think there's ever been a better time to rethink what e-commerce looks like. Because the challenge is, while there's more demand online, I think in an omnichannel world, it's easy to forget how important the role of brick and mortar is. And especially if you're selling physical goods. If brick and mortar is less part of the consumer's consideration and buying cycle, how do you rethink replicating or coming up with proxies for that online is going to become more and more important. And I think you've really got to just online e-commerce has become kind of boilerplate. Everyone looks the same. Everyone follows the same templates. Everyone follows the same design patterns. And I'm not sure that makes sense in a world, especially as you get into considered purchases or more physical goods, that just works in a world that you have far less access to brick and mortar. So that would be my other start. For a stop, this is maybe a little bit of a cop out, but I'd say stop thinking that brick and mortar is dying. I think in the same way COVID-19 has likely significantly accelerated some shifts online, I think it's also going to significantly accelerate the role of brick and mortar and how brick and mortar, what great brick and mortar looks like. I'm very bullish on brick and mortar for a very long period of time. I think consumers want to engage with human beings and engage with the social aspects of brick and mortar and touch and feel and experience product and expertise around it. But I think increasingly it's going to be less transactional and more experiential, which we've been hearing for years. It's just now more than ever, I think that role and how you think about really putting the customer through the physical journey, especially cleanliness and safety and focusing on the customer experience. A lot of things that used to be sort of like, gee, that'd be nice, are now suddenly requirements.
They're the baseline now.
And, it's going to change, but I think it's worth investment. And I think to just write it off would also be a mistake.
All right. Last question. You are on the stage speaking at CommerceNext and in the virtual summit. What are you going to be talking about? Are you on a panel or are you keynoting? What are you doing?
I'm not on a panel. I guess they'd call it a keynote. I'm not entirely sure in a all virtual session what a keynote is, but I guess it means I don't have to share the screen with anyone else.
You own the screen. That's right.
That's
screen
right.
real estate. It's all about screen real estate.
You get to stare at me, and that's it. A keynote, I suppose. And we're. These are short, quick sessions, but we're really going to talk about just the incredible journey Purple has gone through, both from inception 5 years ago to where we are today. as well as how we've navigated through COVID and some of the opportunities that's created for us, including giving back, creation of relief beds and face masks and so forth. What that has really resulted for our company. So should be a fun little view into the world of next generation mattress manufacturing.
Fantastic. Well, Joe, thanks for joining me on The Voice of Retail. I look forward to watching you on the big screen, so to speak, July 28th, 29th. I do thank you for being and joining me on The Voice of Retail, and wish you have a good and safe week. And again, looking forward to see you at CommerceNext in July.
Appreciate your time, Michael. Thanks so much for having me.
Ken, welcome to The Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you very much for having me.
You and I have crossed paths literally over decades, but I don't think we've ever had the chance to really speak together. So this is a real treat for me. And thanks to our friends at CommerceNext, brought us together. But we'll get you back on the podcast a little later, actually, in the summer, and go into more depth. For now, why don't you start out with telling us a bit about yourself, your background, and your current role?
All right. So I've been in the retail industry now for about 25 years. I began my career as a retail industry analyst for a couple of firms that are no longer with us. One was a Northeastern department store chain. The other was a record club, 11 CDs for the price of one. And then I spent some time as an industry analyst for a company called Jupiter Research, where we really looked at the impact of internet on the world. I focused on retail. And then I spent the 15 years after that at various measurement firms, principally Nielsen. I spent 10 years there, and then at a company called Slice, where we were measuring what people were doing online, and really trying to unpack the evolving behavior that we were seeing by trying to measure it, which I always felt was very important. There was in the online space, there's always sort of been a shortage of data to understand what's happening, and I've always been excited as I've been able to kind of break open new ways to see the consumer and what the consumer is doing.
And what are you doing now? You're on your own? You're not with what do you do today?
Yeah, I started up my own consultancy in May called CassarCo, Strategy and Analytics. And we do two things. First, we do consulting projects for retailers, brands, technology providers, and data providers to the retail industry. And we also bring to market non-traditional forms of measurement. After having worked for a while with kind of the traditional ways that the consumer was measured, I've really been kind of consumed over the past 6 or so years with finding new ways to do that, new ways to understand the consumer and what the consumer is doing. And so at CassarCo, we're working with a variety of firms in order to take their data, productize it, bring it to retailers in a way that will be relevant and hopefully actionable to them.
Well, you're speaking coming up next week, coming up very soon at CommerceNext. Now, for my other interviews, I've been asking them 2 starts and 1 stop, including on this episode. But for us, I think I'm going to ask you something different. And you're presenting lots of data as we would expect. So can you give me a kind of the high-level observations or insights that you've seen of what retail looks like so far in the COVID era, and perhaps how you think any of those might reverberate as we kind of walk through whatever the COVID era looks like, 12, 14, 18, 24 months, who knows. But give us a top-line summary of what you've observed.
All right, that sounds good. And and I have been pouring through a lot of data over the past few weeks. And there really is some very good data out there. In the United States, the U.S. Census Bureau puts out monthly trade estimates that allow us to understand what consumers are buying and the types of retailers they're buying from. I'm also partnered with a company called Affinity Solutions that has 90 million credit cards, where they're able to track all spending by consumers on that. And so we've been diving deep into that data. data. And working with CommerceNext, we also ran a survey of 1,000 consumers, really trying to understand their attitudes and their motivations around shopping. And that was a survey in partnership with BizRate. So we have 3 really meaty sets of data that I think will collectively give us a kind of an interesting view into what the consumer is up to today and what she's thinking.
Take us through it. What are the top observations that you've been working? You've been working hard trying to take what you do best, which is take a massive amount of data and kind of draw some insights from it that don't send us down some kind of rabbit hole that actually bring some idea to the listeners and to retailers.
So first of all, the finding that had really kind of struck me is that despite a lot of bleak news that we've been picking up really since March, when at least in the United States, we really were kind of compelled to shut down the economy, the news has been getting significantly better, and I believe that there is money that is up for grabs. Between March and May in the United States, we saw about $104 billion in retail spending basically disappear. There were some categories where spending dropped significantly. We saw a drop over that 3-month period, $44 billion in spending on gas, $90 billion in spending at restaurants, $28 billion in non-essential retail. We also saw some increases. We were spending a lot more on home-related items and in grocery stores as well. But that hit was a very, very significant one. However, when we fast forward to June 2020, retail spending was basically flat to June 2019. And that was a significant improvement from what we saw in March and especially what we saw in April. That's become a little bit lost in the mix because a lot of the commentary that we've seen about the trade numbers that have come out have been focused on month-to-month comparisons. So April relative to March, May relative to June. But when we compare June to last June, we see a very different story, and I think it gives us some cause for optimism.
At the high level, you look at those numbers, and I know the media and all of us as well, we think about our colleagues at retailers who've gone into protection, and that kind of takes over the headlines. But I think what you're reflecting is what I've called this giant circuit breaker on consumer habits. Like they're back to spending, but they're not spending in the way they were before. Yeah. And there are certain categories, apparel, for example, more than any other category has been decimated. Apparel and footwear retailers in the U.S. lost $49 billion in sales between March and June. And unfortunately, given the seasonal nature of the apparel business, some of that is revenue that's just not going to come back. But we're also finding that there's pent-up demand in some of those categories. So in the survey that CommerceNext and BizRate ran, by the way, this was in the first week of July 2020, we asked consumers about categories that they had not been buying because they weren't able to go to stores, that they're eager to get back to, really trying to get at pent-up demand. And the top category cited was apparel by 37% of respondents. Furniture and home improvement was cited by 28%. Health and beauty, more on the beauty side, I'm guessing, was the third category with the most pent-up demand. So consumers have dollars that they're ready to spend. They're waiting for the right opportunity. The trick, though, is that we know that many retailers are becoming very, very conservative with the money that they have for good reason. They're trying to preserve their capital. They're trying to survive until the end of the pandemic. The trick, though, is that with these dollars that are available, companies, retailers that aren't spending on marketing, that aren't making consumers aware of the fact that they're still there, that they have compelling propositions, are probably losing opportunities to retailers. And we think that it really is fairly important for retailers that they maybe become a bit less conservative than they have been, and maybe a little more optimistic than they are. You bring up a couple of interesting points. I mean, back to the apparel category, it's even more nuanced even within that category, right? Such a broad category, everything from casual to formal, and they'll be affected differently as our lives change, right? So how many people are going back to work versus working at home? And, these things are just going to impact different categories differently, even within them. And that last point's interesting, around retailers being conservative. I talked to many who were focused, particularly in the early days of the COVID crisis, on liquidity. We don't know what's coming, so let's just start banking dollars. And it's interesting you're saying that there's probably, as you say, there's money on the table, discretionary income on the table to be had, and how to calibrate how to spend to go after that money in the appropriate ways, right? That's interesting.
Absolutely.
What have you learned about online? We've seen this massive shift to online, this kind of great acceleration of people, either because they had to or because they felt like they wanted to, or they tried it and wow, this really works well. This move to e-commerce, certainly not a new trend. It's been happening for our entire careers basically since the late 90s. But did you see one of the questions outstanding is the waterline went high in terms of demand, but the thinking is as stores open, that waterline is going to recede, probably not to where it was before. What's your data telling you?
Yeah, I think that is really one of the most important questions that retailers have to wrestle with right now. We've seen many retailers scramble to develop certain types of e-commerce functionality, like curbside pickup or online app ordering, for example. In many cases, they haven't made sustained or sustainable investments that will get them through anything other than a crisis. Our data is showing us that the move toward online has been a strong one. Looking at the U.S. U.S. Census Bureau trade data, when we look at May and June and April comparisons to the previous year, online-only retailers, so folks like Amazon and Wayfair, their sales were up 22, 23%, depending upon the month that you look at. And that goes through June. June sales were up 22% over June 2019 in the online category. Again, looking at online only retailers. There's been a little bit of press lately in the U.S. about the fact that the online only sales numbers had dropped by 1.5% from May, and folks had started to believe that we were seeing the beginning of the retreat back to stores, but that really is not the case. The reason we saw that is because there's typically a drop off from May to June in consumer spending, and in fact, the share of spending to online increased during June. One of the survey questions that we had asked about in the CommerceNext BizRate survey was for consumers that had shopped online and specifically whose habits had changed, their online shopping habits had changed during the COVID period. 53% of the folks that we surveyed really said that that COVID caused no impact on their levels of spending and how much they're spending. But 38% of people told us that they spent more, and that was a net positive experience. So those are positive online experiences. Only 9% of people in that survey said that they were compelled to shop more online during COVID, and that was a negative experience. So despite some of the bumps in the road that retailers have experienced as they've tried to catch up with what's necessary, it seems to have had a very positive impact. And then the other part of that is the store part of the equation. And we're seeing that as we get farther into COVID and as we understand the transmission of COVID, we are starting to see consumers becoming more comfortable going into stores. In fact, in the last read that we had, and this is through the CommerceNext BizRate survey, 54% of consumers said that they were either very or somewhat comfortable in store. 18% were very. So there's still a degree of comfort despite the fact that consumers are getting more comfortable going into stores. And so at least through the duration of COVID, it seems likely to us that the levels of online spending that we're seeing are going to are not going to subside.
Well, you've given us such a great, quick overview and an introduction. You'll be on the stage, the virtual stage, of course, next week, and with a lot more data, I'm sure, to present. So this has been a great kind of top-level introduction, and I know I'm keen on tuning in on the 28th and 29th. Which day and what time are you on next week?
I'll be on the afternoon of Tuesday, the 28th, around 1:30 or so, I believe. And this will be fun. I am tackling the consumer with all the data that we have from the consumer, and then Sulcharita Mulpuru from Kodali. I just went back 10 years in time, I think. Sulcharita will be looking at the perspective from merchants. So it'll be a good data research-driven 1-2 punch, we hope.
Well, it's a great dynamic duo. Sucharita's been on the podcast several times, and thank you for being on this podcast. We'll get you back on a little later for a longer interview. Now, just last question. If folks want to learn more about you or the work you do, where do they go?
At this point, they should drop an email to ken@CassarCo.com. We will have a website that is in process right now that, if all goes well, will be up and running by next week.
Right at the moment. Well, listen, Ken, thanks for being on The Voice of Retail. Really appreciate your time. And again, looking forward to seeing the longer presentation and the richer data next week.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Michael.
Thanks to Joe and Ken for being my guests on this special bonus episode. Be sure and visit CommerceNext.com and register for CommerceNext Virtual Summit taking place on July 28th, and you'll hear more from both of these great speakers. Tune in each and every week as I interview the most interesting people in retail. You can subscribe to The Voice of Retail on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure and recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a safe week.